Welcome to this Bitcoin price update for November. Please remember I'm doing this for fun and speak to a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decision. So I've spoken in my previous videos about the different speculative bubbles of Bitcoin, and probably the majority of Bitcoiners think about the cycles, and they believe that the price of Bitcoin is going up in different cycles. Some people are calling this the three green dots, one red dot theory. But you've got to remember that most people are buying Bitcoin not because they know what it is, but because they think that the price is going to go up to 1 million. Each of these speculative bubbles have actually been characterized by a new rush of people coming in to buy Bitcoin. For example, 2017, when exchanges like Coinbase and Binance made Bitcoin more readily available for people to buy. The most recent bubble is characterized by new money coming in via ETFs and stock market listed companies like MicroStrategy. You can see that in the ETF flows, where there's a uncanny correlation between inflows into the ETFs and boosts to the price. And since the ETFs began at the beginning of 2024, their share of all Bitcoin in existence has increased from 0% to about 7%. It truly is remarkable that if you plot out the Bitcoin price in these quarterly packets, exactly every 16 quarters, 3 times in a row now, we've had what people call a cycle high, because in October we had the all-time high of Bitcoin at about 126,000. That means that this three green dot, one red dot theory has actually resolved again 3 times in a row. But it also means that this theory could be true, but that it's also downhill from here for a couple of years. So the way I look at it, either this remarkable three green dot, one red dot theory is true, in which case, unless something crazy happens in the next couple of weeks, we've probably seen the high for this cycle, or it could actually be false and the behavior of Bitcoin has changed, which it does kind of look like that when you look at this time frame, for example. And for that, I've now actually created this new kind of channel line here. I'm going to give a quick commentary about what I think about the price and what I'd be doing with my portfolio positioning if I had Bitcoin. And then I'll be going through all the fundamentals I've been tracking. So, as I've repeated in my previous videos, when I approach how would I be looking at Bitcoin and portfolio positioning, it's from the aspect of a long-term investor. So someone who's invested years ago and would have like a low average buy price, let's say 20,000. I'm not talking about short-term traders. Anyone who's bought their Bitcoin within the last year is a short-term trader, and you should go to the Tony Vay's channel. But I'm looking at this from a long-term investor. I'm also assuming that you've not got too much of your portfolio in Bitcoin. So, certainly like less than 50%. Obviously, given that most people buy Bitcoin just as a gamble and not for any intrinsic good reason, it'd be stupid to have a kind of seriously high percentage of your portfolio in Bitcoin. And if you did have like a highest percentage, let's say 40%, that would be because you'd bought at a time when you'd only like sacrificed 10% of your portfolio, and you've kind of got a legacy position. So given those guidelines, in my last video, I put in target prices of between 200 and 400,000 based on the cycle theory. If we had like a classic 2017 cycle, and on the downside, I created what I called the log line, which was based on a logarithmic aspect of the chart. and which was actually a trend that we'd obeyed since 2023, which did align with what you'd expect to see if we were going to get a classic 2017 cycle. I also had the 52-week moving average on a weekly time frame as a good stop loss, because that wasn't far below this log line anyway. And this is a trend that also hasn't been broken since 2023. Well, in the last few weeks, the log line was smashed, and also the 52-week moving average has just been broken. So based on this, I would be selling half of my Bitcoin holdings on the basis that this cycle theory has held true. We've had like a cycle high 16 quarters consecutively 3 times in a row, but that we'd probably reach the high based on this log line being broken. For me, there's kind of an obvious channel bottom here. And what I would say is I probably wouldn't be selling half again unless we close below this on a weekly candle. So in summary, the 3 green dot, 1 red dot theory, which is actually what the majority of Bitcoiners believe in, that has actually rung true. So that reports as true, but it looks like we've already got past the cycle high this time. It's just that the price was a lot lower than what everyone was hoping for. But I'd still be in because there is a chance that that this cycle pattern is actually false, and it will be falsified, and it will become false if in the next 4 quarters we get a new time high, which would mean that Bitcoin's behaving differently now. That's why I've penciled in these channels here. But if we were to get lower than that, then I would just be assuming that that trend's still true. To sell half, which I've done already, but then sell half again, and never sell all your Bitcoin because of the emotional damage it would cause if you did sell it all and then the price did moon. All again assuming that you've started out with a fairly low buy price. So that's my current thinking on the Bitcoin price and how I'd be trading it. So now to go through all the parameters that I've been checking. So in terms of the ETF flows, we did have a outflow in the last few weeks corresponding with the drop in price. This data though, which is from the block, only includes US ETFs. And when you include all the ETFs in the world, actually it's not so bad a picture. So encompassing all the data, things aren't so bad actually. Here I've got the different cycles aligned with each other. 3 green dot, 1 red dot trend, which I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, me saying it like that now, but that really is what the majority of Bitcoiners believe in. If that trend is true, then it kind of looks like we've probably topped, and 2025 is like a pathetic echo of the 2020 cycle, and we have to wait out the next few quarters. If we beat this all-time high of this quarter, this 3 green dot, 1 red dot theory goes in the dustbin. If we don't beat that price the next 3 quarters, then it's still intact. So here I've got the age of all Bitcoin, and it's still alarming how much Bitcoin is kind of unknown. It's also striking how much Bitcoin's liquid. You know, it's existed for less than one cycle, but still, it is good to show you the big picture, particularly with regards to how in the last 4 years we've seen more companies and the more ETFs buy more Bitcoin, and they've actually accumulated a fairly impressive amount. But we've also got to remember that with Bitcoin, a third of it I'm unable to track down who it belongs to. And so that's why, if you hear Michael Saylor or anyone telling you all the reasons to buy Bitcoin, there's a massive blind spot here, which is why you've got to treat it as a dangerous asset that could wipe you out if you put too much of your portfolio into it. I've already discussed the ETF flows, but I'll highlight that for the US ones, this does look very bearish. What's happened in the last month, say, regarding the outflows of Bitcoin from the US based ETFs. We can see here a worrying trend, and the amount of Bitcoin owned by the US ETFs dropped by 8%. Now, for the treasuries.bitbo data, we actually had a 2% increase, and I'm a little bit dubious of their data, to be honest. But if it's true, then overall, actually, the picture's not that bad for the ETFs. And this would mean that although the US ETFs were selling, a lot of international ETFs were actually buying more than they were selling. So the ETF picture is actually looking quite good and would stack up with what would be my last hope for Bitcoin, which is that we've kind of entered a new paradigm of we could be basically breaking away from the cycle theory into this new kind of pricing future. Obviously, nothing's going on in terms of countries buying Bitcoin, with a few rare exceptions of Bhutan and El Salvador, who don't really have a significant amount anyway. The vast majority of Bitcoin owned by governments is just when they seize Bitcoin off people. And so there's nothing going on really on the countries front. In terms of companies, was more Bitcoin being owned by private and public companies. However, in terms of MicroStrategy, they really are now failing to buy any more Bitcoin. And when you look at this plot here, it's kind of looking bearish, or neutral, I guess. But compared with, if you look at all the green earlier in the year, we're in a bit of an uncertain moment here from this data plot. In terms of retail on exchanges, that actually took a dip in the last month. Here's MicroStrategy. It feels a bit like the game's up for MicroStrategy in terms of being able to raise more money to buy Bitcoin. Here's the companies owning Bitcoin, and what's notable is that Galaxy Digital Holdings increased their holdings by 33% and Marathon by 4%. Nothing going on with the private companies. So onto my KPI. The cycle I've got on Amber, firstly because although within the next few weeks this could all change, of course, you got to say that a month from now, if the price doesn't go up, we're dealing with a kind of pathetic echo of 2020 rather than a classic Bitcoin cycle of 2017. Well, yep, the cycle theory was true 3 times in a row. The problem is we've hit the high this quarter. So it's therefore down from here. If you do believe in the cycle theory, aka 3 green dots, 1 red dot theory. Like I say though, maybe Bitcoin's going to behave differently this time. So make sure you still have some exposure to that possibility if you're a long-term holder. The ETFs I put on Amber because overall they didn't move that much. And in terms of companies, that's still good, really. There's still generally more companies buying Bitcoin and selling Bitcoin. MicroStrategy is now a red light because they're sort of crowded out by lots of companies that have come in since then to do the same thing. But it is kind of indicative, really. When we look at these public companies, if we start seeing no new additions for a couple of months, that could actually be very worrying for the Bitcoin price. And my too good to be true meters, they're obviously all safe, but to be honest, I think they all need a bit of recalibration. So that completes my update for the price of Bitcoin. I hope you found this informative, and speak to you at the next video. I do videos like this one just for fun as a hobby. It's for entertainment purposes only. Always consult a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decision.